What's up, everyone? It's Books&Looks TV. Today, I will be examining misogynoir, fatphobia, and transphobia via Eddie Murphy in his films, public lawsuit, and marriage and dating history. My overall questions are: in which ways did Eddie Murphy display misogynoir in comedy? Did his characterization align with his public displays of colorism, homophobia, and transphobia? Historically, the comedians of the pre-civil rights era, the comic forebears of Gregory and Cosby, generally passed through the Chitlin circuit before they could access the white comic venues that filtered the quote-unquote talent into the entertainment mainstream. By the 80s, there were two frequently intersecting roads for stand-ups of all colors into American film comedy, and one of them happened to be Saturday Night Live. The other through comedy programming such as HBO. Although the first era of Saturday Night Live can be hailed as cutting-edge television humor, it was not a place for black comics to shine. Over 3 decades, the quote-unquote black guy or girl on Saturday Night Live has often been an underutilized player whose screen time is minimal and whose characters are ancillary to another player's central role. From Gary Moore's Chico Escuela on Chevy Chase's Weekend Update to Tim Meadows' lampooning of Oprah Winfrey. Eddie Murphy was the notable exception to the quote-unquote black guy syndrome. Before the end of his freshman season, between the years of 1980 and 1981, on Saturday Night Live, Murphy was a major presence. In fact, Murphy's recurring characters, the grown-up buckwheat, as a post-Little Rascal celebrity, a Borscht Belt, cigar-chomping version of Gumby, and Mr. Robinson, the Mr. Rogers of the Hood, ended Saturday Night Live's first comic slump era in the early 80s. By the time Murphy left the series in 1984, he was already a bona fide crossover star on stand-up's main stage, an act captured in Eddie Murphy Delirious in 1983, and was well on his way to big screen superstardom with 48 Hours in 1982 and Trading Places in 1983. The first movie I noticed Eddie Murphy with a leading love interest whom happened to be ambiguous and or multiracial was in Harlem Nights. So in this movie, Jasmine Guy played Dominique, who was basically a setup girl for the rival club owner. She was sent to get information about him, again, to relay to the owner. One night, a gangster named Tommy Smalls arrives at the club with a beautiful Creole woman named Dominique LaRue, who was Jasmine Guy. Ray recognizes Small as the manager of the rival Pat Club, run by white gangster Bugsy Calhoun. Ray notices Quick admiring Dominique from afar and warns him that she is Calhoun's mistress. Baffled that such a beautiful woman would be involved with a fat, ugly gangster like Calhoun, Quick introduces himself to the woman as the suspicious Ray offers Smalls one of his best tables. Later, Calhoun learns that his business is down at the Pity Pat Club, while Ray's business, according to Dominique and Smalls, is pulling in an estimated $10,000 to $15,000 per week. Time passes in the movie, and arriving at a restaurant to meet Dominique, Quick is surprised to find Calhoun and his assistant, Joe Leone, at their table. Calhoun asks Quick to work for him, but Quick refused. So basically, a lot of things are going on, and during the meantime, Quick and Dominique happen to be intimate. And during that time, Dominique tries to, for the YouTube guidelines sake, unalive him. And he does what she was trying to do to him. Y'all get what I'm trying to say. Though Dominique and Quick were not a couple in this movie, it is shows how desirability often can make a man weak, and the lady just happened to be mixed, and or Jasmine Guy, who was the it girl, often I would say because of her features. The next movie is Dr. Dolittle. And in this movie, Eddie Murphy was a doctor who could speak with animals, and ironically, his wife happens to be Kristen Wilson. As you can see, it's a similar features about who his leading lady is. Third movie is Coming to America, which is like a fan favorite. And this movie, I think, is one of the most obvious signs of colorism, because I think a lot of people noticed that Eddie Murphy had like a light skin woman by his side. Which, there's nothing wrong with having someone light skinned or multiracial. I just think it's really vain when people just go after someone based on how they look and or show anti-blackness. But anyway, in this movie, which I understand they had to come to America, but it was just funny to me. This man left the entire continent, which has different ranges of like beauty, literally woke up with women, etc. And he said he wanted a Western woman. But anyways, in this movie, the leading lady happens to be Lisa McDowell, who, compared to a lot of the other women in New York City, is like the most feminine and most kind and very hardworking. And then there's like scenes where the sister, she outwardly says, I don't get guys' attention like Lisa does. She gets all the good guys. And Lisa basically, she already has someone, but Akeem is in love with her because he never seen anyone as beautiful as her. He never seen anyone as kind as her. And he just wants Lisa. And so the fourth movie is Boomerang. Now, in this movie, Eddie Murphy played Marcus, who was a cocky ad executive and had a reputation as a ladies' man. It's kind of giving me Waiting to Exhale vibes, except Eddie didn't live with his mama like Martin did. Anyway, Marcus happens to get a taste of his own medicine when he is wooed by Jacqueline, who is played by Robin Givens. And meanwhile, Marcus also begins to develop for Angela, who happens to be Halle Berry, who, if I can recall, he took from his best friend, which is another story. But anyway, Halle Berry, who is biracial, is depicted as someone who is thoughtful and kind. Ironically, there was a scene in this movie where Grace Jones, who is a dark-skinned, slender, tall black woman, is depicted as aggressive and off-putting to Marcus. Meanwhile, Jacqueline is depicted as confident and Angela as a bit submissive. So the next movie I'm going to talk about is Candy Lane. This movie was like a family holiday movie where Tracy Ellis Ross played the leading lady, and the family's mission was to complete an annual home decoration contest. And I'm going to transition to my misogynoir piece. And misogynoir is the hatred of aversion to or prejudice against black women. Now, Eddie Murphy has never said explicitly that he hates black women, but he does depict behaviors that would make someone question if he does care or respect black women at all. One of those behaviors happens to be how he portrays the mammy character. So a mammy is a United States historical stereotype depicting black women, usually enslaved, who did domestic work, including nursing children. The mammy is usually a grossly overweight, large-breasted woman who is desexualized, maternal, and non-threatening to white people, but who may be aggressive towards men. The concept of the mammy was constructed in the 1830s as a stout, dark-skinned, smiling, hardworking, doting woman who offered the only quote-unquote redeeming embodiments of black womanhood imaginable within the intertwined race, class, and gendered distinctions of the Old South. The mammy archetype lives on as black women continue to be put in a position to serve others, particularly whites, in what's O'Malley referred to as mammification. The latest iteration of the mammy stereotype adds a twist in Norbit, the Medea movies, and Martin Lawrence's Big Mama films. The mammy characters are played by men dressed as women, adding another layer to the desexualing stereotype. Black women need to define and value themselves to challenge society's definition of them because black women possess a unique perspective of their experiences that may not get articulated because the hegemonic societal structure gives them less control, as stated by Patricia Collins. In addition, allowing the voices of black women to be heard offers value because it helps the women to resist the dehumanization essential to systems of domination. A major component of misogynoir refers to how people associate both hypersexuality and hypermasculinity with black women. It creates a false binary that dehumanizes black women and leaves little room for individuality. This combination serves to victimize black women and reinforce false perceptions about their bodies. Misogynoir has very real consequences and is directly connected to their safety and well-being.
So now I'm going to talk about how Eddie Murphy has mocked black women in movies like The Nutty Professor and specifically Norbit. So, in The Nutty Professor, Eddie Murphy continues his multi-character role by putting on a fat suit, projecting the mammy character through Sherman Klump's mother and grandmother. The mother is depicted as someone who is kind, nurturing, and sympathetic to her son. The grandmother is quite the opposite. She's a bit obscene and obnoxious, and she's just basically the loud matriarch. The leading love interest in this movie happens to be Jada Pinkett Smith, who in my opinion isn't light-skinned, but medium brown and light enough for Hollywood and to be like Eddie's love interest in the movie. She is ironically referred to as Miss Purdy. And so now I want to shift gears a little bit and go to like one of the most iconic scenes in the movie, and that's when Eddie Murphy roasts a young Dave Chappelle who goes by the name of Reggie. Well, before this happened, Reggie, he pretty much clowned Sherman Klump. Jada Pinkett, or Miss Purdy, is upset, similar to how she was in the Oscars, about the jokes of a comedian, but this happens to just be a movie, so y'all know. She said she doesn't like this guy, and in general, Buddy Love doesn't feel like the comedian is that humorous, and so he basically challenges him to a roasting battle, and a lot of the jokes he makes is towards his phenotype, which Reggie looked very similar to him. He was dark-skinned, except he did have locks, who Buddy Love referred to as shitlocks. Maybe people didn't see it as anti-blackness because I guess jokes are jokes, particularly in that era. But in hindsight, there was a lot of anti-blackness. And I think that stems from particularly Eddie Murphy internalizing maybe him moving through Hollywood, and even Rick James making fun of him and how dark he was, as Charlie Murphy would state. Eddie Murphy played this scene so iconic and the entire character of Buddy Love because Eddie Murphy at one point was depicted as a loser. People overlooked him, and as my best friend said, the only reason his jacket became iconic because he used that as the insecurity to feel better. Like, a lot of people buy things to look good or distract you from who they are, and I feel like that jacket gave him confidence, right? Just like with Sherman, when he took the potion to become Buddy Love, he became confident and a quote-unquote chick magnet. And the only thing that changed again was this arrogance and weight. It wasn't necessarily people did make fun of Sherman Klump, but it was his insecurity that got in his head and made him feel ugly per se. Like, yeah, we live in a society that's anti-fat, but mostly Sherman, he was just someone who didn't have confidence in himself. But anyways, once Buddy Love took that potion, he had everything that Sherman had. He was depicted as a professor. He had access to money. And Sherman had a character too. Again, he just was kind of shy. So anyway, I feel like Buddy Love was depicted as Eddie Murphy after he became successful in Hollywood. And I would argue that that's why he played the role so well. I think that The Nutty Professor was kind of overlooked at depicting the mammy character or being anti-black woman because he put on a fat suit and he played multiple characters. And also the main character, which was Sherman Klump, was also obese and a black male virgin, that people felt so much sympathy for him or just laughed at him that I don't feel like they probably really saw him depicting the mammies as far as his mother and his grandmother as offensive. But his next character, Respucia, would be highly criticized by film reviewers and black female activists, etc. Now I'm going to talk about Norbit. So the Seattle Times says Eddie Murphy co-wrote the story and screenplay for Norbit. He portrays both the meek nerd, Norbit, and Norbit's jealous and overbearing wife, Respucia. The movie was number one at the box office when it opened, and it drew harsh reviews from film critics and protests that it was misogynistic and an outrageous characterization of large black women. Norbit, played by Eddie Murphy, speaks with a lisp and wears nerdy, oversized plastic glasses. As a young boy, he meets Respucia, who's obese and domineering even as a child. She tells him that she's his girlfriend after she rescues him from class bullies, and she makes notice to his skin tone and pretty much forces him to be intimate with her, which at that time was just holding her hand. Respucia is depicted by Eddie Murphy as cruel, selfish, and abusive. She sucker punches him in the face and cheats on him. And on her wedding day, the congregation pretty much view her as disgusting when she lifts her veil, which to me was depicting fat phobia, and it was inappropriate for her to do that, let's be real. But Respucia is so over the top offensive that one would wonder why Eddie Murphy wrote the script with his brother Charles. And people really get the question, like, what were these Black men thinking? Don't they know about the myth of the Black matriarchy? And so there was an infamous theory by Senator Patrick Moynihan that suggested that Black women's overbearing strength was the root cause of the breakup of Black families. And it was met with waves of protests from African American scholars and activists that continue even to this day. Basically, it just seemed more like documentary where people started to question how the media was depicting Black people. And then there were all these reports and like digitally, academically, and people started to be concerned about how Black people's image were in the state of the Black family. And a lot of people just weren't respecting what he put out. Thandie Newton, who happened to be the desired love interest in the movie, she kind of struck me as odd when she said that she had to struggle to get a role because people didn't really see her as funny and didn't know how she would fit in. Yet she kind of justifies, in my opinion, Eddie Murphy's reasoning for writing the movie. And she kind of, to me, just disregards Black women by saying, well, he was inspired by watching online movies where really large women, African American women, would beat up their tiny husbands. And she just talks about how he's such a great star. But I'm just like, I don't know. That was just a little strange to me. So someone says, food for thought, why do Black male comedians often use negative stereotypes of Black women as the butt of their jokes? For example, Respucia and Medea. And so, of course, again, people were not happy about this. So there was an activist by the name of Najee Ali from California. And he led a protest of this movie, and she called upon Murphy to apologize. Eddie Murphy's character, we feel, is offensive to African American women and perpetuates those negative stereotypes that large Black women are violent, unattractive, promiscuous, and buffoons. When people just asked Eddie Murphy, what was your inspiration for this? He said, I wanted to do something edgy because I've been doing a lot of family movies, lots of stuff with kids like Shrek and Daddy Daycare and Haunted Mansion, which were terribly cute films, but I wanted to do something edgy. So Norbit was slammed for being racially insensitive and carrying hideously offensive Black stereotypes. There was also its fat-shaming caricature of Respucia, and a lot of critics believe that the ads and its ridiculous name, Respucia, contributed to Eddie Murphy losing the nomination for Best Supporting Actor during the 2006 Oscars. An author states, none can benefit, that is, except screen gems like Red Fox and Martin Lawrence, from a silence around one of the most symbolically devastating treatments of Black womanhood. The film project recalls 19th and early 20th century blackface of stage and film in which white men stereotypically portray Black women, for example, as mammies. Such depictions have barely been reformulated in the 21st century into a sort of Black woman face, with Black male performers distorting both Black women and the rituals of drag. Black women are cast as intellectually inferior and physically repulsive for entertainment, while drag becomes a punchline, thereby denying any understanding of the cultural significance of a practice which serves to broaden definitions of and reconfigure manhood. Feminist scholarship could and should speak up far more loudly about the trends and implications of these performances, as stated by Robin Means Coleman. So now I'm going to shift a little bit to racial preferences and homophobia displayed, in my opinion, by Eddie Murphy. And so first we're going to start with how Eddie Murphy depicted a lot of homophobia and his early stand-up. Someone says, perhaps more significantly for the purposes of this study, the anti-gay sentiments of Murphy's stand-up persona replicates the strains of homophobia in the Black community, a notion rooted in the questionable connection between homosexuality and centuries of actual and virtual emasculation, and a Leviticus-informed anti-gay dogma for certain segments of Christianity. Eddie Murphy happened to say that he had no issues with gay people, but he often just randomly talked about it in stand-up, and I never really understand how people don't like something, but they talk about it a lot. Like, it's one thing to talk against something you don't like and bring change, but it was just kind of weird. And ironically, Eddie Murphy would be caught with a trans woman and notably questioned and joked on. So I'm going to read you the excerpt. Police stopped a vehicle driven by comedian Eddie Murphy early Friday and arrested an alleged transsexual prostitute Murphy had picked up earlier, a sheriff's department spokesperson said. Deputy Mark Bailey said the suspect, Adazone Sowili, 21, was arrested on an outstanding prostitution warrant, but that Murphy was not arrested. Mr. Murphy was apparently not charged with any criminal activity, he said. Bailey said Murphy was seen to pick up the suspect on Santa Monica Boulevard at 4:45 a.m. and that deputies later stopped his vehicle. Sowili, described by Bailey as a transsexual, was taken into custody. The deputy sheriff said there were no further details of the incident. And so at this time, Murphy is like this huge star. And CNN pretty much also reported on it. And, they were like, well, why did you pick the stranger up? A spokesperson said that Eddie Murphy basically had trouble sleeping on Thursday night, and he felt relentless and decided to drive to a newsstand. And after leaving the newsstand, Murphy spotted someone who appears to be, quote unquote, having a problem. And then he goes on to say that Eddie Murphy stopped his vehicle for this stranger to see if they were all right. And at the time, the individual asked Murphy for a ride, and he agreed. And the spokesperson said that Eddie felt like he didn't do anything wrong, and he was trying to be a good Samaritan, and look what happened. And so, y'all, let's be real. Just think about how probably many people reached out to Eddie Murphy who knew him personally, and Eddie Murphy wasn't stopping for them or giving them anything. Like, it just sounds like a far-stretched story. It sounds like something you can make up, and I guess that's why a lot of comedians kind of clown him. So Saturday Night Live, for instance, had a sketch with Tim Meadows, and Tim Meadows, he presented himself as Eddie Murphy, like he's performing community service by saving a transsexual. I feel bad because the transsexual, well, it's been said that she was harassed with hush money and that he had this ongoing behavior of messing with other trans women, and that basically people came after them, allegedly tried to just keep them quiet, and one of them happens to end up unalive. And I can't say that this has anything to do with Eddie Murphy, because there are a lot of trans women who are unalive, especially sex workers. And I just think it's unfortunate that she was put into this limelight, and she probably was just living a life always like that, where, her humanity was always on the line. Or who knows, maybe she got in a car with someone who did harm her. I don't know, but I hope she rests in peace. And I just really think it's sad that people are often used based on how they look. Ironically, this trans woman did look really ambiguous. And now I'm going to transition to Eddie Murphy's actual relationships, or public relationships that he's acknowledged. So a lot of people, based on his casting, like who he's been casted with, which I can't necessarily say that all of them have been chosen by Eddie Murphy, but I wouldn't be surprised. But in real life, most of the people he with seem to be like multiracial, light-skinned women. And so he was married to Nicole Murphy from 1993 to 2005, and he had 5 children with her. Then he also shared 3 children with his former partners, Paulette McNeely, who happens to be white, Tamara Hood MLB, who also happened to be multiracial. And I just want to say this. I think some people misconstrue my message or try to misconstrue my message. I don't think there's anything wrong if someone chooses to date someone who's non-Black per se. But when it stems from like anti-Blackness, that's when it's weird. It makes sense to be with someone you find compatible. But if you always look for someone who's like lighter than you or they have to be mixed, I think that's weird because they're like a lot of people who are beautiful of the same race. So now I'm going to get to the public opinion. Someone says, it's shocking that Eddie Murphy has had so many Black women fans when he's anti-Black and colorist. These men make millions degrading you. Also, I understand he apologized for his past anti-LGBT comedy, but it was birthed from self-hate. He was known to solicit trans sex workers. Someone said he sued the Inquirer for millions for exposing him soliciting sex from trans women while married. He dropped the lawsuit once it became evident that he had multiple witnesses and trans sex workers willing to testify. Eddie Murphy used his attorneys to bully and pay them to recant. Remember those Dr. Dolittle, Daddy Daycare, and the Haunted Mansion? Do you think Eddie Murphy's rebrand from an explicit no-holds-barred comedian to a family values comic was accidental? It was to ease the stench of a sex scandal from his legacy. And so an author says, Norbit is the Murphy-isms to the point that you forget that you're watching Murphy. He is wholly committed to excavating the personal trauma, internal psychology, and innate humanity of a guy who'd be a caricature of all-time loserdom in another actor's hands. In a film whose heart can be questioned from the blatant fat phobia and obvious misogynoir to the unnerving feeling of appropriation, Murphy lands ugly jokes and unlikely motivations into something that traverses the borders between offensive and sensitive in such an uncomfortable and fully committed manner, you can't help but marvel at his defiance. Okay, then someone else says, Eddie Murphy delirious 40 years later. I called Eddie Murphy delirious last night and thought it was rough. I never got offended by off-color humor, but some of the stuff he said just seemed like he was being offensive just because it's offensive with no humor behind it. However, he did have a ton of charisma and stage presence, and the audience was eating him up, making it entertaining. Maybe it was just a product of his time, and things have changed so much since then that it's impossible to see the special in the frame it was intended. The homophobic language is hilarious when you consider Eddie was caught with a trans woman years later. I'm convinced anybody who is homophobic is in the closet about their true feelings. Ironically, when Eddie Murphy has been asked about race, he responded that race was never an issue in his career. And he says, I've been making movies for 40 years and never once could I not get a movie made because I was Black. I transcended that stuff. And it's just funny because I remember when I did my rock video essay, which YouTube, anyway, I'm gonna have to redo that because copyright, whatever. But The Rock said the same thing. And so it just seems like, I think it's perfectly fine to not feel like you allow others to use your race to hold you back in life. There's nothing wrong with feeling confident about who you are, despite being Black and what people think about Black people. But for Eddie Murphy to say this was probably kind of politically correct. Like, to a degree, Eddie Murphy is very talented and very humorous. But for Eddie Murphy to pretend that him being a Black man did not hinder him in some kind of way, whether it was him tap dancing in his early career to even feeling like playing a Black woman, or as the author said it earlier, putting on Black woman face wasn't a way to like woo or some type of internalized racism is just crazy to me. Again, I think it's really okay to date out your race if you want to. That's your prerogative. But the fact that Eddie Murphy has never, I think it was with Whitney Houston at one point, but just in general, the women he commits to don't look like him, his mother, and that's who he's always casted with. It just shows like some level of anti-Blackness to me. But these are my thoughts, and my thoughts are my own. Let me know what you think down below, and thank you for listening to Books and Looks TV.